Hello, my name is Bob Christian. I am a professional sound designer and composer and engineer. I've had the privilege of working with Long Beach Opera since 2008, having worked on over 40 of their productions, and including the most recent one, which was Henry Purcell's King Arthur that we did at the Beverly O'Neill Theater here in Long Beach. In this video, I want to give a brief explanation of what sound design is and give some examples of its use in action. Sound design is the creation of a soundscape or environment that envelops the listener and draws them into the performance. And it can include environmental sounds, ambient sounds, special effects, even animal sounds or mechanical sounds. It also includes the engineering aspect, the technical aspect of putting sound in certain areas that the listener will hear, and also that the performers can hear, because they need to hear themselves as well. And the tools that are used for doing this have evolved quite a bit over time. Historically, they were just small hand tools, boxes that people would bang on or manipulate, and they could even include bells and so forth. That as far back as 3000 BC, the Chinese used bells to emphasize certain areas of their religious performances, and it would also invoke some emotion within the listener. And nowadays it's evolved into doing the same thing as far as invoking an emotional response within the listener. But we use a little bit different tools, and especially since electricity came into the picture in the late 1800s, especially for sound, it has improved the ability to project sound to the listener. It's also helped lighting people out, because instead of using candles or gas burners and lime lights, they now can use electrically operated lamps, some of which are light emitting diodes that electronically produce light, and it has improved things quite a bit. It's also improved things a lot for the sound designer, because with digital technology, we've been able to broaden what we actually do in a sound environment in creating those soundscapes. So I'm going to give some examples of some of the early tools that were used to produce sound and sound effects, as well as some of the newer ones. And I'll even have some examples of what I used on the latest performance, which was King Arthur at the Beverly O'Neill Theater, because we used quite a few different effects, including some echo effects that we added to just the voices in certain instances to create a feeling of vastness or space. One of the early uses of devices to create sound effects that was used from way back, many hundreds of years, was thunder. And the devices that they used to create that thunder could be anything from a bowl that you rolled balls around in. They could either be metal or wooden balls, or in large wooden boxes that they would drop the balls into and then roll them around. That would give the striking of the thunderclap. as well as the rolling thunder sound that occurred afterwards. There's even an example of that here in Long Beach. In 1926, the Ernest Borgnine Theater was built, and in the back of the theater, stage right, suspended from the ceiling, is a large rectangular shaped wooden object that's not perfectly rectangular, and it slopes in certain areas, and then there's these round devices in there that drop and then roll around, and they use that to create thunder sounds on some of the early productions there. And we were able to do an opera there called Three Tales, and we didn't use the device for that, but it was just amazing to have seen it in the theater, because it's what the early sound designers used to recreate their sounds. Also, one of the ways that they used to create wind sounds was to have a large cylinder, typically made of wood, and then they would drape a piece of canvas or leather over the top of that. They would have a hand crank on the cylinder, and they would turn that hand crank, and as the cylinder would turn, it would rub against the canvas and create a wind-like noise. And that's been used quite a bit in theater over the years, over many hundreds of years. One of the more current devices that we use for creating sound involves recordings. I have something that I use that is a digital sampler pad that has about 16 triggers on it, so I can have 16 sounds loaded into that I've created, and then trigger them at the proper time. Typically it's either me following the score and looking for the hit points and the cues for that, or I would have the sound or stage manager call the cue and have it given a number, and when they would give that number and say go, I would trigger that particular sound. I use that extensively on King Arthur, and I'll give you some examples here of those sounds that I used. In the beginning of King Arthur, there's a place where Arthur is on the bed, he's waking up, and he's going to turn on the television and listen to the news. And it was recorded by Cambria, an assistant stage manager, and I then manipulated the sound so it sounded like it was coming out of a TV from the stage to give a little more realism to it. And then I assigned that particular sound to a certain pad on this sampler device that I have. I'll trigger that, and you'll hear a little bit of what she was saying.
Privately, the president had often talked about fortifying a border wall with water-filled trenches, stocked with snakes or alligators, prompting aides to seek a cost estimate. He wanted the wall electrified with spikes on top. Privately, the president had often talked about fortifying a border.
Okay. Then a little bit later on, there was a point within the opera where it called for a spaceship to jump to light speed, and it took a while to create the sound for that. I ended up layering about 8 different sounds that I created on one of my synthesizers to give that feeling of jumping to light speed without stealing the one from Star Wars, which is probably the most popular sound, and I didn't want to be guilty of stealing someone's thunder. I'll give an explanation of what stealing someone's thunder is in a little bit. And that particular sound was this. And it was of a specific length, and it coincided with the action that was taking place on the stage. And then later on in the opera, towards the end, when they were wrapping things up and Arthur was giving his final speech, it called for the sound of a crowd groaning when he said that he was no longer going to be doing the leadership. And that sound was that, and then it was quickly followed by a mumbling of the crowd in the background as they were absorbing this information. So this particular tool really makes that easy to do, because as the stage manager says go and makes the call for the cue, I can quickly hit the appropriate pad and trigger that sound. Most of us have heard the phrase, "They stole my thunder." Typically, we take that to mean that the special attention has been stolen from somebody, particularly a performer on stage, who may have been upstaged by someone else and felt that that other person stole their thunder. And it's applied to a lot of different things in life. The actual origins of the phrase can be traced back to 1704 London, and a sound design apparatus that was used to produce thunder in a play called Appius in Virginia by the literary critic and playwright John Dennis. The play itself failed and was canceled shortly after it started, but the sound creation of the thunder and the device that was used ended up being copied and used close by in a production of Macbeth. And John was not very happy about this. And he, among other words, said that they stole his thunder. He used probably some other words that were more colorful to describe that, but anyway, the phrase stuck, and we've used it since then to apply to other things. Now, I'd like in a later video to go into more detail on the history of sound design and also the history of some of the tools that were used and the people that created those tools. Very worthy of a video in their own right. And in the meantime, I appreciate you watching the video, listening. Hope you learned something. And I really look forward to seeing you at operas in the future. And stay healthy, keep safe, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.